Wasn't nervous before, I am nervous now. But I want to thank everybody for inviting me to PyCon. I've had an absolutely wonderful time meeting so many of you and getting to try new things in the process. And Lorena and Naomi were correct. This is a wonderful group of organizers, attendees, and from the moment that we stepped off the plane and crossed out of the exit into the airport, there were a whole bunch of you welcoming us and have been so gracious the last few days. So this has been a really special conference for me. So I hope the rest of you enjoy it. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend a little time sharing some of the things that are going on right now with Python and with Jupyter. And after I get through some of the beginning stuff, I'm going to share a story about education and learning, because both are very important to me. So I'm going to share a story from a summer workshop that I taught this year. And hopefully it will lead to some lessons, because I learned some things from teaching it. I learned that there's 3 key things that we could be working better at with Python that would help improve Python's use in education. And it's already wonderful in education, but we can make it even better. And then I'll wrap up with some steps about how we can do that and some things you might want to try. And then I will take questions on whatever topic related to Python or Jupyter. Okay, so this has been both a very exciting past year and a very unusual past year for Python. As most of you know, Guido van Rossum, who is the creator of Python, stepped down as the benevolent dictator for life, or BDFL, and that kind of threw us in a little bit of a tizzy back in the early part of the summer. What was going to happen? Well, I've been involved with a number of different areas within Python. As you mentioned, the Steering Council for Python is a new role that was just announced on Monday, so very new. I'm a core developer. I am also a PSF fellow, and I served as a PSF director. And this picture is of Valeria, and I met her at PyCon Argentina. She gave her first talk at PyCon Argentina about how to get started with Python. And it was funny, it was informative, and what was really touching was the support that she had from all the Las Sistemas friends. She had probably 20 women sitting in the very front of the audience and many other people cheering her on. And had one of her special friends actually help her with the talk deck and things like that. She was really nervous. She did absolutely great. And I know some of you here were first-time speakers, and equally, you guys have done a great job. For those of you that don't know my Python background, I've only been in the community since 2013. I started using Django for an open source project called OpenHatch, which helped people get started and involved in making their first commit to open source. Through that, I met a very interesting woman whose energy ceases to amaze me. In fact, she might be in the room somewhere. But I met Jessica McKellar, and her encouragement of me was one of the really big reasons that I got more involved in Python. She sent me a very nice email. She asked me to join the talk committee. And if I look back to 2013, if somebody had said, you're going to be on a steering council for the language of Python with Guido and 3 other folks, I would have said, in no way, this is not in the cards at all. But although there's been many wonderful people and kind people that have encouraged me over the last few years, I want to give a special thank you to Jessica, because without her, I would not be standing here. So, and are you here, Jessica? Oh, the MIT love. Yes. Okay. And go see your keynote tomorrow. It might actually be really good. So we've had an exciting year with Python. And one of the things that has happened is Python's had phenomenal growth. Whether we're reading in The Economist or we're looking at stats from the JetBrains survey, Python just keeps growing and growing. Also this past year, we selected a new governance model for the Python language and where that language should go and may go. One of the other things that we use on a regular basis is PyPI. And Donald Stuft and the amazing packaging team rolled out a brand new PyPI, which was actually beautiful. It gives you much more content about your projects now and makes it much easier for people to find your projects. So that's pretty cool. We also released Python 3.7, and Ernest Durbin was hired as an infrastructure director for the PSF. So he helps support the PSF efforts as well as the infrastructure for core Python. So what's behind the growth of Python? Why now? Well, Python 3 has finally gotten quite a bit of traction and is really the de facto choice now for most new projects. There's a website that tracked the top 360 packages within Python. We are now at 359 of 360 are Python 3 compatible, which is huge because I can remember when the number was far smaller. So the traditional things like web, DevOps, systems stuff, and Python being a glue language is something that gave us a great foundation for growth. Another place we've seen growth, and we've had some talks about it here, is in embedded systems and in the Maker community with both MicroPython and CircuitPython. And what this does is it actually makes Python accessible to a whole new group of people who love hardware, people like me who started off as electrical engineers and not software engineers. So. And this is an example of a student in Illinois who made this very elaborate dress. The photo does not do it justice, but it had all kinds of lighting and control, and it was really cool. And also, it should come as no surprise that data science and science have been huge drivers of the growth, particularly in the last 5 years for Python. Fernando Perez, who's standing with me here in this picture, we were at an award ceremony, and he was the creator of IPython and Jupyter and has really led the effort for improving the tooling in science. The growth has also, Jake mentioned this morning, came out of a lot of really wonderful, rich packages that we have in the PyData ecosystem. Jupyter would not be nearly as successful as it is now if those packages did not exist. And for those of you that love AI and deep learning and machine learning, there's lots more good stuff coming. And the visualization stuff, I've got some examples as we go on. So back for a second to governance in this post-BDFL world. We had no BDFL for probably about 6 months. And in September, the core development team got together for a sprint, not everybody, but a large percentage of them, and we started talking as a group as to what kind of governance would suit Python, the language, going forward. And we came up with some ideas. Now, I don't expect you to read that because it was just a mind map of ideas. But what we found as we were talking was there were actually a lot of common themes, and people were generally on the same page. And it was really only that highest level back here of who makes the final decision that really was at the core of which model of governance we should choose. So what did we do? Well, some of us went and researched what other communities that are successful are doing, Jupyter, OpenStack, Rust, and others, and wrote one PEP called PEP, 8002. And then people started writing PEPs for the models that they would like to see. And I sort of took the role of not really endorsing one, but editing and helping people communicate as clearly as they could what their models are. And after a long review process and a vote, they came up with PEP 8016, which is the steering council model. And you can read about that if you choose. But some of the high points are, for Python's language governance going forward, and I'm hoping 13 is a lucky number for Python, but what we want to do is maintain the quality and stability of the Python language and the CPython ecosystem. We want to make contributing as accessible, inclusive, and sustainable as possible. We also want to formalize and further maintain the relationship that the core team has with the Python Software Foundation. Although the Python Software Foundation owns the intellectual property of Python, traditionally the decisions about Python the language were made by Guido. Now, he's also the president of the Python Software Foundation, so it's not as if they were completely two different things. But it's coming to, we're beginning to see that with the expense of, CI systems and testing things and bug trackers and things like that, we need more help from the Python Software Foundation to help fundraise for infrastructure as well as things like the sprint, which was very valuable. The group of the steering council is going to start making decisions on PEPs, but we're not going to do it in a vacuum. There may still be PEP delegates, and we're going to try and seek consensus within the community as these things go forward, because it doesn't really serve the language if we're polarized 50-50 on a new feature. That doesn't make sense. So I'm really grateful and humbled to have been chosen by the other core developers as one of the 5 members of the inaugural steering council. It's a very exciting time. It's probably going to be a very busy time, but each of these individuals are so incredibly talented, as well as many of the core developers are also equally talented. So I think we're in for great stuff in 2019 and even better stuff beyond. So I'm going to switch gears for a second, because not only have I been involved in Python, I've also been involved in Jupyter and Interact. And Jupyter, I think many of you know what it is. I am a core developer on primarily Jupyter Hub, Binder Hub, mybinder.org, though I have done work on the other projects as well. Interact is a different notebook front end. So it uses the same notebook files, but it's built with a React.js front end. And one of the things, Netflix is a big user of Interact, and one of the things that I've been involved with in this project is things like Papermill, Scrapbook, and Bookstore, which are tools to make data workflows better with notebooks, how to store them, how to diff them. So hopefully we'll be seeing more good things out of that. And we do work together. We were just collaborating together with Microsoft and Google and Amazon and a few other companies recently, and at Netflix. So hopefully that will continue. For those of you that might not know, the Jupyter Notebook its success is due to the people that have been using it. And unlike an IDE or just an editor, I think the power of the notebooks is it lets you tell a story. The ability to combine prose with code, with visualizations, and the ability to share all of that with other people, much like in tutorials or workshops, people use it to help with teaching, has been really powerful. And there's many tasks that can be accomplished with the notebook outside of computer science. Like we're seeing many different disciplines, from music, art, operations. There's a group in Japan that are using it for their operations workflow. So if something goes down, they have a notebook, they run the notebook and get their systems back up, which is kind of cool. Okay, what else is going on in Jupyter land? Also, like Python, we've had huge growth. We were very honored with the ACM Software Systems Award, and we received that last year, and we owe both gratitude to Python, the language, for giving us such a great foundation, and then the entire Jupyter community for being so supportive of the project. This award was a big deal because people who had won it in the past for us, the people who had won it in the past were Unix, the web, Mosaic, Java. So it was a pretty big honor to be in the same class as things that we use every day. Some people think that we have hundreds of developers working on Jupyter, and that's not in fact the case. We have a very small core team. In fact, not everybody in that picture is part of the core team, but pretty close. So, and probably half of us were paid on the grant. We're an academic grant funded organization, a nonprofit. So we are fully open source. We're dedicated to open source. We're dedicated to open science and data science. And we hope we will meet everybody's needs. We tend to be a really friendly project, so if you have questions, please ask. If you don't get a good response, please feel free to contact me directly. At mentioning me on GitHub's the best way. And then Interact really came out of the work that we were doing in Jupyter. And Interact's another open source project in the PyData system. And it lets you do similar cool visualizations. But one of the things that it does that the classic notebook does not is you can download a binary and double click to install it, which makes things kind of easy. Now, in truth, you still have to have Python on your system, but at least you're getting a little bit closer to a user experience like if you were to install an app on your phone or your computer. All right, another part of Interact is these data science workflows that I had mentioned before, and doing it at scale. Netflix has a lot of data that moves back and forth every day, and Papermill's been around for about a year. It lets you parameterize notebooks, and that lets you run them without having to hit Shift-Enter for every cell. You can change what the inputs are and run regular reports with it. And then Scrapbook extends that, and Bookstore, which is probably only 3 months old, is actually storing the notebooks on like S3 storage and letting you retrieve it. I didn't know until I was at Netflix earlier this week that it was actually out in production and they've been using it the last 3 months. So Netflix, beware, because I don't know that I would have used it yet, but it seems to be going well for them. All right, so my story, now that we've kind of covered what's new and exciting in Python and Jupyter, my story has a lot to do with how do you teach 13 to 18-year-old students to be interested in computing and to be excited about the possibilities that that offers them? And so my story is actually about an interactive Python for education and learning. And it's an epic story. And by epic, I mean engineering possibilities in college. I spent many hours this summer teaching groups like this one how to get excited about interactivity in computer science and to keep them and foster their interest in science and engineering. So how did we do this? Well, I thought about what interested myself when I was that age, which was a long time ago, and I have a 24-year-old and a 22-year-old children, and actually they're adults now, I guess, but they loved computer games and digital music composition, so I decided to focus on the interactivity within computer science and blend that with some real-world examples and useful applications of Python. So I ran into some obstacles, and some were big obstacles. First, it was a 2-hour workshop. I had these students for only 2 hours, not multiple 2 hours, just 2 hours. I didn't know what hardware I was going to have available to me, whether it was going to be laptops or iPads, before the first day of the workshop. I knew that I could not install anything on these systems, so my options started to become fairly limited into what I could do. Now, just to make it even more fun, they were a bilingual group of students with differing levels of English competency or Spanish competency, and so I had to teach it in both English and Spanish. And as those of you who've met me, I don't speak Spanish, so that was another challenge. And also the students, some had no experience at all programming, and some had a few years of experience programming. So my solution, and I've shared the links, and this talk is already on my speaker deck, so I'll tweet it out later. But I came up with this workshop that basically took the students through 8 projects. And I use the term projects kind of loosely because in 2 hours, it's hard to get a whole lot of depth done. But what we were able to do is we were able to introduce to them what people work in computer science. We're not all programmers. People write documentation, people do great design work, people build communities, and that's all really important. And so we started with that. And then we also realized they're young people, they might not know what careers are out there. So I went back and I looked at my friends in the Python community and tried to get a pretty good cross-section of people in different jobs and who came from different backgrounds. And they got to, the project for that one was to really pick who resonated with you and to think about, just spend a couple minutes Googling them and seeing what they are doing. We then moved on to design, because I think design is a really important thing. Making things that users love is important. And the way we did that is Google Doodles has like this amazing collection of games. And so we had them take those things for about 15 minutes and think of which ones appealed to them, how they would change it, which ones they didn't like. And so they started realizing like, what made a good interactive game? Was it music? Was it sound? Was it, challenging play? And so that's when we really piqued their interest. And so we started them working with JavaScript. I would have loved to have started with Python, but in Python, we didn't have all the documentation. Running Python in the browser is a little more challenging than running JavaScript in the browser, and in particular, P5.js, which some of you may know the processing computer language. It was designed for artists and musicians, and it's very user-friendly. The examples are very visual. And they had an alpha web-based IDE that was in both Spanish and English. And all the documentation they have is in Spanish and English. So it was a great choice for that. So we let them play around with it. And instead of trying to teach them, like, this is a loop, this is a function, what we did is we went through several examples at a time, and then said, okay, now here's this short example, change something, see what happens, play around with it. And whether they were changing how fast something moved or the color of things, they started realizing hey, I can do this. And we got a little more complicated in Project 5 and had them do some drawing stuff and started introducing them to JS Fiddle so that they could see, hey, the websites that are out there made of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Python, often on the back end, and just showed them okay, you can inspect the tools that we would use to inspect what's going on in the browser. And after we did that, that's when we moved back to Python, Jupyter, and Binder. And we started by showing them how Jupyter is made of Python and JavaScript, just like the JavaScript that they had just played around with for probably 45, 50 minutes. And, excuse me, we let them launch their own notebooks because we could do that in the browser and got to play with it. But one of the favorite things they had, which surprised me a little, but it was a very pleasant surprise. Jake mentioned earlier that Colab is part of Google Research. Google Research also has a number of phenomenal AI examples, tutorials, interactive things with TensorFlow and Magenta, and they were actually able to mix sounds together, determine, draw a sketch, and then try and have Google guess what it was. And it was pretty cool, and they loved it. And at the end of 2 hours, they felt they wanted to use this stuff, they were enjoying using it, and most of all, they felt capable. They felt empowered, much like Django Girls does in their workshops the first time somebody builds a Django website for the first time or uses the command line for the first time. It's an empowering thing. And so where does Python fit in this? Now, it wasn't ideal, but we did introduce some Python. Would I have loved to have done Python completely in the browser? Absolutely. Would I have loved to use processing PY, which is a Python version of processing, with them? Also, absolutely. So I think there's 3 key things that would position Python well for the future in education and learning. And those same 3 things would also serve the greater Python community, all of you as well. And these 3 keys, perhaps unsurprisingly, are how Python works in a web browser, binaries for distribution, and how Python supports mobile. And I'm going to just spend a little time going through each one. And the first one is JavaScript and WebAssembly. And I look at those, and I don't view them, either technology, as a competitor to Python. I think it's something that will make Python even more productive. And the web, let's face it, that is the universal platform. People have access to the web before they have access to hardware, and they access it in many different ways. Python and JavaScript, many, many websites use it, and so it seems like a natural fit. I stumbled across a really cool project that some folks from University of Illinois did and presented at SciPy this year. And they were basically improving Jupyter widgets by using WebAssembly and Rust. And ultimately, you were able to get to the point that you could just install it with a pip install. Let me see if I can't. So the talk is great. The URL is down there. I don't expect you to furiously type it in now, but it will be there for you later. But one of the things that the talk was about visualizing data. And not just any data, data that has many, many points, data in space, data like genomic data. And the problems with that is if you try and update something, there's typically a latency, like if you're trying to zoom in or zoom out. And they made a lot of progress with that and using WebAssembly to make it really responsive. And it was still using Python and the familiar tools that you would expect in the notebook, but being able to zoom in and out of like a galaxy was pretty cool. So why would that be important? Well, it lets us think a little more about science. It lets us explore our data. It lets us extend what we can do with that data. For those of you that are into deep learning or machine learning, it lets us tune our parameters on the fly. And overall, it makes the science more accessible. Another great project that is part of the Jupyter ecosystem is by Martin Brettles, and it's IPyVolume. This may be one of my favorite projects, just because it makes 3D things come alive. And it is not difficult to get started with it either. Some other examples of IPyVolume are on the next slide. Let's see if I can get them both going at the same time. The one is sort of a mesh of something, I don't know how the resolution is, but you can actually manipulate it with your mouse or whatever your tool is to move things around on your screen, fingers, whatever. And you can zoom in, you can zoom out. The animation is really interesting, and it really, it kind of gives you a real-world feel of what's going on. I think animation is something that is really interesting. Jason Moore, who is a professor at UC Davis, ran a particular favorite workshop of mine that used SymPy, PyDie, and the Jupyter widgets to create a set of 8 notebooks that illustrates the physics of somebody trying to stand up and balance. And it had equations, symbolic algebra. It then, translated into using numbers. And by the time you got to the 8th notebook, you had an interactive animation of, if I set the length of my legs to this, how does it impact my balance? And you could see it in real time. And that was really powerful. And I think you think of many different things that we do, and a lot of people look up YouTube for videos on how to fix things or how things work. It's sort of the same thing with interactivity and animation in the notebooks. All right, the second key thing, I think, is what I'm calling binaries, but we could use whatever word, but it's the user installation experience. How do I get the tools I want to use on a system that I can access? We talked before that Interact lets you double-click install. I think that's a step in the right direction because there's a lot of complexity in the tools that we work with. Whether you install things with Conda, pip, pipenv, if anybody has had conflicting dependencies in the past, it can be a great joy to try and undependency them. Read Jake's blog post for more insights into Conda and pip and all the fun around it. You also want to be able to distribute something. And as we get further and further from computer scientists to people in the everyday world using Python or the notebooks, how you distribute those tools to them is really important. I don't want to have to know pip and the command line to run something really cool like IPyVolume. I just want to be able to double click or to go to a website and have it ready. There's one project that I think has been really promising in getting us much closer to that. And you'll hear maybe a little bit more about it tomorrow from Russell. So I'm not going to say too much now. But Beware is a group of tools, and it lets you cross-compile, or I'm probably using the wrong words at this point, but it lets you run things natively in many different formats or operating systems. And at DjangoCon this year, we actually, not we, but Philip and Russ were able to package the Jupyter notebook with Python and have a proof of concept that, yes, you could install it natively, which was really powerful. Mobile, portable for global users. We have gadgets on us, mobile phones, tablets, and we use them in different ways. Python's website does have a nice little mini IDE in the browser, so we know it's possible to run Python well in the browser. It's just we need to refine it a little bit more. Also, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Python Software Foundation, if you go to python.org, there is a tab for the Python Software Foundation. Joining the Python Software Foundation is free. Naomi and Lorena would be thrilled if you did join, as would I. And I think it's what keeps our communities vibrant and brings us great events like PyCon Colombia, user groups, and just general education things with Python. All right, so mobile, we want things, we want our information, we want it on demand. We don't want to wait for it. And we don't want somebody telling us, oh, you must use this version of something in order to run it. You just want it to work. And so as we look at mobile or tablets or the web, we want to make sure we're providing solutions that work for a large number of people. In the world of accessible science, we realize that people are using Jupyter on the web, on mobile, on tablets. One of the projects that I was involved in and still am is Jupyter Hub, which lets us serve notebooks to groups of users, whether it's 20 people in a research group or thousands of people in an introduction to data science class at Berkeley. Jupyter Hub gives each student the same environment. They can customize it a little bit, but as a student, it doesn't matter what kind of computer I have. I could have a Chromebook or the fanciest MacBook. I'm still going to get the same experience. So that actually gives you much more equity across education. Another thing that we were able to put together was something called Binder, or mybinder.org. And any of you could go to it today. We were funded by the Moore Foundation as a proof of concept to reproduce scientific papers and let you put in a GitHub repo or GitLab and click launch, and all of a sudden it would load up Jupyter Lab with whatever you had in that repo. And it's a really cool tool. We've got a really friendly Gitter channel for Binder, and I would encourage you, if you're trying to set it up for your repos, if you have a requirements.txt or an environment.yaml, it will use that. If you're doing more fancy stuff, you might want to, we have got pretty good documentation around it as well. So I would say definitely reach out to us. Another thing with getting tools where you need them is the fact that we're serving a global community with both Python and Jupyter. And people have different access to the web. Data is very expensive in some countries. Some countries have limited access to hardware. They might just, mobile phones may be the tool of choice in those countries. And in many countries, electricity can also be an issue, and having power reliably and really impacts the experience. So if we're giving huge files to people, they might not be able to download it in a reasonable time. So we want to think about that as we develop our projects and our products, because in order for the global world to use it, you have to take into account what is going on in those different countries and how the people are using it. So, how do we make this happen? How do we get all the goodness that we already have in Python or we have in Jupyter, and how do we make it even better? And where does Python as a language fit in that? And on one hand, we want all these cool new things, but on the other hand, we don't want Python to be buggy or unstable. We want stability, and we want to introduce enhancements on a reasonable pace as opposed to putting something out there that's going to break for you. So, can we do that? I think we can. Armin and I talked a long time at PyCon India this year and had lots of debates about WebAssembly and things like that. And I think he was right in that Python needs a bold vision for the future. And by a bold vision, I think it's a vision that lets us combine with an implementation that can thoughtfully be measured and maintain code quality. So while we pursue these new features, let's not give up what has been Python's strength for many years. So as for the possibilities for the future, what can you do? Well, one thing you could do is you could keep up with WebAssembly news if web-based stuff is of interest to you. I think there's going to be a lot more coming down the road in the next couple of years. And you may want to, like the folks at University of Illinois, give Rust, WASM, and Python a try together. The site that I had shared with you has good steps on how to get started with that. It was far less complicated than I thought it would be, so that's encouraging. So hopefully, at least in the science field, more people will start adopting it, because I think it will allow us to do some interesting things. I would highly encourage you to try Beware and its tools, and I will give them an extra plug for being a great project for new contributors. They have gone above and beyond to be welcoming, encouraging, at PyCon sprints and also in their communities. So if you've never contributed to open source and you think you might want to, that would be a good project to start at. What? Oh, there you are, Russ. You could say not something nice about Jupyter tomorrow. And another thing that I think I've said several times now is think about the user experience for your work. And perhaps the most important thing you can do is enjoy the rest of PyCon Colombia. Because never have I been in such a cool party bus. And I had a great time throwing these things at Clay. I'm a little sad that I did not explode anything and I had to leave early, but I want to thank all of you for having me here, for being such gracious hosts, for doing all that you do at Python. Pay it forward, and I had an amazing experience earlier today. I got to play with the robot, so it made my day as a geeky open hardware person as well. So thank you, enjoy the rest of the conference, and if we have time for questions, I'm happy to try and answer them. Thanks. And now I'm going to get off my box and see all of you. And my apologies to the people over there if I didn't make eye contact with you. It was hard to see with the lights. Does anybody have questions? Uh-oh. Is it a hard question or an easy question? It's just a question. Okay.
Thank you, Carol.
You're very welcome.
Roman Prochachenko here. So I've tried teaching people some of the introductions to the IT and computer science, well, mostly computer engineering, to be fair.
Right.
I did that at the university. I did that in my private life when people come and say, well, Roman, teach me something. I'm from Ukraine, where people don't speak English as a native language, and as all of us know that IT industry has English as a de facto standard language. You
Right.
cannot go beyond the sum of the level in
Yes.
this without that language. So, and what I always faced as a problem with people whom I tried to teach is that. Since they never were in IT, they never had this need to be proficient in the language, in the English language, and they, of course, didn't want to start learning IT with these, contributing your life for 1 or 2 years to learn the language first. So, of course, as a community of Ukrainian engineers, we made some of materials available in Ukrainian language. I made some of my learning materials available in this language as well to my students. But then we faced this issue that we can teach the students or people to code or to program things. And then we just had to say to them, well, now you have to give up this. You have to leave this for 1 or 2 years, and you have to learn English. And then you can return to IT. So, as you have experience with multilingual communities,
I do.
Have you ever tried to fix that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough problem. I think, and a really great example of it being done well is the Django Girls tutorial. The fact that they have supported so many different languages has really accelerated access to people. Now, Julien Pallard, who is a Python core developer, actually this past year was made the person in charge of translations and different documentation in languages. Having core Python documentation developed in different languages other than English, which I think will help. I don't have a simple answer. Google Translate is not a bad option. Surprisingly, it does pretty well when you're in a conference room or whatever. But I think I would approach it a little bit differently with students, and this is based on my experience with Spanish-speaking students in the US, is give them materials that are useful in their native language, and as they build proficiency in the material that has been introduced, gradually introduce English. So instead of it being a binary, like I'm working in my native language, boom, now you're in English, good luck. I think a gradual approach is good. I think another way that you can help with retention and giving people who perhaps don't speak English but still are interested in programming is we have many different user groups in the Python community, and we have conferences across the world, and the user groups are actually, whether you're speaking English or you're speaking another language, you have people that are potentially more experienced than you that can help guide you to quality resources and how to do things, and they can speak to you in your native language. It's not perfect, but it's at least a step in the right direction. So that's what I got. You're welcome. Anything else? You have no questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
So I'm curious, this is maybe a very simple question. I'm curious as to how the interpreter on the Python website works, because isn't a Python virtual machine a bunch of megabytes? Does it have to download all of that first, or is it a subset of Python?
To be completely honest, I don't know how it works on the Python website. I'm assuming it uses Python, but I don't really know.
Then maybe a better question is, for the future, how do you envision Python being deployed to the browser without requiring, a 10 megabyte download with SQLite? Do you think there's an easy solution, or is that a hard problem that we have to solve?
I think it will come in places like Colab or Jupyter in the cloud, in whatever vendor, or even Binder, which takes the burden off of the install and puts serious compute power to doing the Python-y stuff. That's the best answer I've got. But would be worth following up and figuring out how they do it now. Cool, good question. Is everybody ready for lightning talks almost? Kinda, sorta? Who's gonna do a lightning talk? Raise your hand if you have a lightning talk. Raise your hand if you've ever done a lightning talk. Nice. Raise your hand if you have no idea what a lightning talk is. It's basically you get up here and talk for a few minutes about something that interests you in the Python world. And I use that loosely because one lightning talk I saw was actually how to pull Post-its off of the Post-it stack correctly. It was actually a very good lightning talk, too. Did you have another question?
Yes, I had two questions from the beginning, but I waited patiently so not to steal anyone's time. Yep. Since you have this new governance committee in Python in Python community basically, and you have the new PyPI. Mm-hmm. I have this question related to that. So there is a ton of packages available in PyPI, and unfortunately some of them are sort of dead packages. They are not being developed, they are not being maintained, and the maintainers of those packages have forsaken them for eternity. So,
correct.
While they take space, that's the least of the problem. They're also sort of dangerous. Could become sort of dangerous dependencies for some of the projects. So somebody may rely on one of those dependencies, and then will have troubles moving on from that. And there may be some security issues and stuff. So are there any plans on maybe marking those dependencies as inactive ones, or deleting them, or doing something else to this issue?
I have not heard of anything. The best group to talk to about that would be the Python Packaging Authority. They've done an outstanding job with the transition to the new PyPI, as well as they've really put together documentation that makes it a whole lot easier to create a package that then you can host on PyPI. It is really well done. It used to be a little bit of a mystery in certain places, but they've done a really good job of making it accessible and the tools around it accessible. So I thank them for doing that. Beyond that, I just honestly don't know. But I hear your thing. I think as users or developers, it's important to look at how active a package is. And don't assume that the dependency will always be maintained, because people have lives and people get exhausted, or for whatever reason want to move on to a different project and abandon it. There is something in the Django world called Jazz Band, where they adopt like different projects that are useful in pretty much the Django world, but maybe somebody wants to start that for other projects. Okay, you have a question?
I have a question regarding the question right there.
Do you know the answer?
No. I don't know the answer. But I have a question that it's related, and it can partially answer it, but I don't think so that much. What do you think about Trinket, about bringing Python to the web? I have used it a little bit, but I always I follow these physicists that write a column in Wired, and he always give a little snippet of code that is using Trinket, and I think it's pretty useful, and for teaching, I have used it a little bit, and it's useful because you have just...
Trinket's been around for a while, and their emphasis is teaching. I'm not familiar enough with what the project is doing now, whether it's open source or closed source. I think certain things like Binder is going to help with that. And we just actually, I think about 20 of us who are educators in different aspects and have used Jupyter, wrote an open source book on how to teach using the notebooks and tools from that ecosystem. So while Trinket may be a good solution, I don't know. I think it's imperative that whatever solution we choose is something that's open, and I think just by default, open's a good idea. Cool. I think we have time for a couple more questions before lightning talks.
This is just a quick 10-second follow-up. There's an answer, and it's code splitting. You just send chunks at a time of the VM as it needs it. Martin just told me that. So.
Rock on.
Yeah, so just a quick thing. So in my past, we used to do tons of Citrix deployments.
Right.
And we always had the problem of deploying large applications like, Microsoft Office suites or something over low bandwidth lines. And there was a company which evolved from the gaming industry called Softricity, which solved this problem by profiling the application and streaming only the bits that are actually used.
Right.
And it does some sort of a prediction in there.
Interesting.
And this evolved basically in the big data centers into some commercial products that do this. And I expect basically with WASM, when it becomes more, then we can land on that and basically stream applications to the web. And then problem solved. So.
It would be really cool if you have any interest in writing a blog post to maybe write some of that stuff down. Either how it works now or what WASM might do. Because I think we learn best from each other. And
absolutely, yeah.
You've worked with it, so that would be
I'll do my best, and I'll definitely follow up with you.
Cool.
So, cheers.
All right.
I have a quick question. What are your top 3 favorite companies or projects developing in Python?
Wow. Top 3 companies. My own. I honestly don't know. I mean, I think we rely on our companies that are using Python to give back to Python. So I like Colab. I like what they're doing. I like Jake. I like Beware. I mean, project-wise, it really depends on your interests. One project I really love, which got me much more interested in Python, was Music 21. And that's a music theory library. And you can use it with the notebooks, or you can use it from the command line. And for people who don't see themselves as computer programmers, something like Music 21, music's a universal language. People typically like music, whether they're listening to it, or they're playing it, or they're composing it. And so that's a pretty fun library. And some of the natural language processing stuff's kind of cool. There's lots of cool. Magenta is really cool. If you haven't played with that, I really would recommend that. Not that TensorFlow is not cool, but Magenta's more fun. Yeah. All right. I will be around all day tomorrow, so if more questions come up. But again, remember the important thing, enjoy yourself for the rest of the conference, and then get some sleep later. Thank you very much.
Thank you.